Hi, everyone, and good afternoon. I am very pleased to welcome you to our fourth EAMC at-home session. We're really looking forward to today's content. I think it aligns with a lot of the questions and ongoing feedback that we've had a lot from the folks who are on this call and the attendees, and asking us, what do we know about return to live, and when are fans, and what are fans saying? So first, I'm Jessica Runyon. I'm the VP of Sponsorship on the EAMC board and also with Ticketmaster, and I'll be moderating today. So before I hop into content and introducing our presenter, I'd like to knock out a couple of housekeeping items. So thank you to all of our EAMC attendees who continue to join us on these at-home sessions and have shared ongoing feedback along the way. Your feedback has been incredibly valuable, especially the last few months, and the dynamic that you've had across sharing has been instrumental in keeping folks engaged and helping add value to the larger group. That note, we will actually be sending a survey this Friday from EAMC, so please take a look and be looking for that in your inbox, because we would love to have your feedback, not only with our at-home sessions that have been taking place, but also feedback around EAMC in general and future conference events. So please take a look at that and take a few minutes to fill it out, and know that as a board and as a committee, the EAMC group values your feedback and certainly makes decisions based on that to give you the best experience that we can and add the most value across not only learning opportunities, but also networking. That said, without further ado, I am thrilled to introduce our senior researcher at Ticketmaster, who's been leading the charge on a lot of the data and fan insights that we've been working on through COVID the past few months. Jen Plebani is on the line, and she's going to be our presenter for today's session. And Jen has, as I mentioned, been leading the charge for us on this effort on the Ticketmaster side, but overall has almost 2 decades of experience in the field across entertainment and academia and UX research. So, Jen, one of the things that we have continued to hear from a lot of our EAMC attendees and across the industry is there is so much data out there today. There's so many new articles or fan research that's coming up, or another source of an opinion on what's going on, and I'm just inundated with data right now. So how do folks know, or how should they be thinking about what they listen to and how to navigate that landscape? So I think it'd be great if you help set us off and kick things off today with that.
Okay, thank you so much for setting me up so nicely. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And it is really hard to know. What do you do with all this information coming in? How do you know what to trust, what's going to be most useful for you? And as you mentioned, I've been doing this for a long time. So I have a couple suggestions based on my experience that hopefully will help people sort through all the information coming in and decide what's most valuable for you, what's going to be most helpful as you move forward. The 3 things that I suggest are, think about who are the people that the research findings are based on. Is it live event fans like we talked to in our Ticketmaster work? Or is it a more general group of people? The closer in that group of people is to the things that matter to you, the more valuable their information is going to be. If it's a general population sample, they may or may not be your people. So how much they're in the space that you want them to be in is up in the air. Second thing is, how many people contributed to that information? Usually a bigger sample is better, because that bigger sample is arguably more representative of the group of people that it was drawn from. So if you've got a survey of 1,000 people, that's probably a better representation of the possible universe than a survey of 100 people. The information I'm going to present is part of our ongoing work. We've got a total of just over 21,000 fans that we've talked to from April till now. And we're continuing to gather information so we can track changes. So do you need 21,000 to have confidence in your data? No. But that being said, you know, a couple thousand is always going to be better than a couple hundred for knowing that you've got enough to find meaningful differences and meaningful information. And the third part is, how specific and relevant are those questions that were asked to your particular needs? If the questions are specific to things like, you know, live events, to sporting events, to going out in public to do things socially, those are probably more valuable than general questions around behavior related to COVID. So those are the three things: who, how many, and what. And that's basically how you kind of sort through some of that information. And now, that being said, I will take you through our most recent fan research and insights share out. This just came out. And as I mentioned, we've been gathering data since April to really try and track people's thoughts, attitudes, and behaviors around COVID, and specifically around returning to live events. Okay, oops, sorry about that. I appear to have gone one too far. Okay, hang on one sec. There we go. Okay, so this is, as I mentioned, an ongoing pulse on our fans' emotional location as we navigate the future of live events. This particular wave is about 5,000 fans. Information was gathered April into May. And as I mentioned, we continue to gather this information, so we're constantly updating it. This is based on US fans, and we have a companion project that focuses on Canadian fans as well. And the focus here is to understand how people feel about returning to live events, what their timelines are, what their concerns are, and what's going to make them comfortable at live events once they do return. And because of the number of fans in here and that broad representation of US live event goers, we've been able to segment them into groups based on their expected return to live events, and to characterize those groups based on their attitudes, their beliefs, and their behaviors. And we think those profiles are going to be a helpful guide to venues as they work through how to welcome fans back to live. So, to sum it up, if you completely tune out after this, these are the three things that we're hoping you take away from this talk. 1, know your audience. Understand who you are talking to. As I mentioned, we've split our returners into 3 different groups: early, middle, and late. These are roughly equal groups, and effectively communicating to each of them is going to require addressing some of the particulars of each. 2, because this is a world in flux, everything is uncertain, and it's really important to track shifting trends. Keeping an eye on fan demographics and tailoring responses accordingly will help build trust. You know, these fan groups have different wishes, wants, and needs, and keeping an eye on how they're reacting will help you relate to them. And finally, think outside the box. Be creative in your approaches to live events. This is a brave new world. It is full of unknown unknowns. And change is being forced upon all of us. And obviously, coming from Ticketmaster, I am well aware of how difficult this change is for everybody. And what I try and remember is that diamonds can only be created under tremendous pressure. So as much as we can be creative and use this as an opportunity to try out new things that no one would have ever considered trying before, hopefully things come out in a new and ultimately good way. So I mentioned that we've got these 3 fan segments. I'm going to take you through each of them in detail to give you a better idea of how each of these groups are viewing that return to live events. First, I want to talk just briefly about how we got to these. in our benchmark survey, which kicked this work off, we asked a series of psychographic questions to help us understand fans beyond just their live event behavior and beyond just COVID-19. We wanted to know who they were as people. When we looked at the data around when people expected to go back to live events, we saw three groupings, three natural breaks. So then we looked into that psychographic and demographic information we'd gathered. And what we saw was that each of those three groups had distinct attitudes toward life, and they had different belief sets and different behaviors generally. And so on the next couple slides, I'm going to take you through each of those returner groups. Okay, so snapshot of these three. The early returner, about 36% of fans. They are ready to get back to live events. They're spontaneous, they're adventurous, and they're trusting. So when venues reopen, they're the ones who believe it's fine to go back. They're going to be looking to venues, to Ticketmaster, to other groups to say, okay, it's fine. Middle returners, 34% of fans. They're a little more concerned about things. They're very family oriented. They're very health conscious, which likely drives some of that additional concern. And they're planners. So they're going to want to see things open and see how it goes and then go back. And then there's the late returners. That's 30% of the fans. They're not going to be attending live events for a while. They want to see that things are safe. And to them, safe means things like a vaccination. They're cautious, they're independent, they're information seekers. Those late returners are going to be the group that needs to see what happens when the early and middle returners go back to really make a decision. So let's talk a little bit about these early returners. Their adventurousness and their trust makes them ready to go back. In fact, some of them are reporting they are ready to go back to live events even before live events are actually open. Some of them would be there tomorrow if they could. Almost all of them are missing live events a great deal or a lot. And over 3/4 are going to go back to events at the same rate they did pre-COVID. So this group, they're going to be easily recaptured. They tend to over-index on being a little younger, on being more male, and they're a little less diverse than the middle and late returner groups. They tend to purchase concerts and festivals and sports. Some of them are still in college, some of them didn't complete college, but they're career driven. And as I mentioned, they're game, they are ready to go back. And so that is essentially what we're seeing with these early returners. They are also willing to deal with things like social distancing and, seating restrictions, but they're not happy about them. They'd like things to go back to normal. So they're totally cool with hand sanitizer. The other stuff they'll deal with, but masks, they're not so fond of. So it'll be important to talk with them about that and get them to wear masks, because as I mentioned, what they do and how things go early is going to help bring middle and late returners back. And for early returners, they're comfortable going back to venues of any size, indoor venues, outdoor venues. It doesn't make any difference to them. Now, for those middle returners, they want to learn more. They miss live events almost as much as early returners. And they're a little lower in their plans to attend live events at the same rate as they did before COVID-19. As I mentioned, they are family focused. And they tend to purchase a lot of theater tickets. They also purchase some concerts and sports. Now we know theater is going to reopen in 2021. So these middle returners may be looking for concerts and sports to fill that gap until theater comes back for them. They are really interested in health, as I mentioned. They also believe that they are trendsetters, that they are the people who stay ahead of the curve. So, you know, leaning into that a little bit will be helpful for them. They want to see the venue clean. They want to see that the staff are healthy. They want to see lots of visible evidence that things are clean. They are preferring small to medium-sized venues that have safe distancing, leaning a little more toward outside versus inside. And they're the questioners, they're the curious ones. It's not that they don't trust all the information they're getting, but they want to be able to process it a little bit to really feel confident in what they're doing. And our late returners. They're still reporting, you know, over 3/4 of them miss live events a great deal or a lot. And their rates of planning to attend live events as they did pre-COVID, those are lower. For them, information is everything. They need to make sure that they can see all of the policies and all the safety stuff that's available. They really want to see masks, and they want to make sure that you know, those rules for safe distancing and all the other rules are followed. They're people who like routines, and because they like routine, they're going to want to know exactly what's going to happen, and they're going to want to have the same thing happen each time they go to a venue. So standardizing things is going to be important for them. And they want to see small venues, and they prefer outdoor venues, which, as we know, those two things don't usually co-occur. So figuring out how to balance those is going to be important. And as I mentioned, they want to see evidence that things are going well. So they'll believe stuff once they see it. Evidence that things have reopened and it's gone well is going to be important to them. A vaccine, even more important. And they are people who are high theater and arts ticket purchasers. So the fact that theater is not coming back until 2021 is okay for them because they're not planning on coming back until then. So those two things actually line up fairly nicely. Okay.
Nice. Jen, can I stop you for just a second? We have a couple questions I think make sense. A couple that have came through on this side that tie nicely, I think, to this transition are one being that, you know, we have seen data and we all know that what we're seeing today is not likely, you know, or it could change for tomorrow. And then also what we saw in April has changed. So the two-part questions, or actually two different questions I've seen here so far, is one being, over time, as we've seen changes, are there common themes that you've seen that have stayed the same in the fan insights that haven't really changed that much, or, you know, that giving a sense for the group here, you know, while we know there's a lot of things that have changed, are there trends as what's staying pretty flat, pretty consistent? And then the other question here, and you can decide how you want to weave this in, is basically, it looks like the venue, the contact says, you know, as we have seen now this data, and we know that it's changing, in the last 2 to 3 weeks, we're starting to see some spikes again, and infection rates rapidly increasing. How do we anticipate this to impact the data, and if there's anything to note there?
I will take the second question first. Yes, we have seen spikes, and we, as I mentioned, this is an ongoing effort. We've been running multiple waves of research, and we actually have had waves in field, you know, over the past couple weeks, and we will have them in field over the next couple weeks. So we'll be able to see whether the spikes and the reclosure of certain areas has led to a change in fan perception, in fans' willingness to return, in how their timelines change. In the next section, I'm actually going to take you through some of the data that shows how things have been changing over time. And what I will say is that the fans' desire to return to live events has remained constant. We have seen shifts in their desires for things like feeling more comfortable with outdoor versus indoor venues. But generally, most of the trends have been what I would call fairly stable over time. We're not seeing huge swings in fan perceptions. What we're seeing is, in some cases, a gradual lengthening of the timeline for when they expect things to reopen, and by extension for when they expect when they expect to return to live events. But what has stayed constant is, even as those two things move back in time, the lag between them, that lag between restrictions lifting and being able to and feeling comfortable returning to live has been fairly constant. So the absolute dates are shifting, but the pattern is staying remarkably steady. Does that answer that question?
And I think you said, I think it does. I think it gives a lot of background, and I think the content that I know you said that you're going through next will help even highlight that more. So yes. Some of the overtime shifts. Yeah, I think that's perfect.
Okay. All right, cool. Here we go.
And then the group, just so the group knows, since we're in transition, feel free to throw any questions out that you guys have along the way so that we can make sure they get answered, either directly in the Q&A box or however is comfortable. Thanks, Jen.
No worries. All right, so I'm going to take you through some of the trends. Okay, I will orient you to this chart. The x-axis along the bottom is the lag time between when restrictions lift and when fans will feel comfortable returning to events. So 1 month basically means restrictions lift, they're comfortable returning to live events within that month. 2 months, within 2 months, within 3, within 4, more than 5. So when you look at the 3 lines, the dark one is the line from our first wave, and then the middle purple is the second wave, and the orange is the third wave. So when you look across that, you can see that over time, you've got a smaller proportion of fans indicating they'll return at most of the time points in May than they were in April. However, you can also see that the shape of those curves stays fairly constant. So that's what I was mentioning before, that even though people are shifting back a little, what they expect to happen time-wise is staying pretty constant. When you look across the top of the chart, you can see we've got drop-down lines for early, middle, and late. And that represents the average time when those groups of fans expect to return. So early returners, they're going to be back right away. Middle returners, within a month and a half, 2 months, and later returners within about 3.5 months of restrictions lifting. So rather than this being based on if things open in June, what month will you come back? This is really based on when things reopen, how long will it be before you are willing to come back? And as you can see, those early returners, they have stayed very constant over time. Hardly any shift at all. Middle and late returners, we're seeing a little more spread between them, but still not a huge difference in the timeline upon which they expect to return. We also took a look at where we find these early, middle, and late returners across the US. And this is a snapshot of a handful of the cities that make up some of our DMAs. And so you can see for a place like New York, that's been very hard hit by COVID and early on, and is just now starting to open, far fewer early returners than late returners there, versus someplace like Tampa, where over half of the sample from there are early returners. So you can see that there are some differences across the country. Denver, high proportion of early returners, Los Angeles, mostly mid returners. And so you can see how these different areas break out. And as I mentioned, and as was a question earlier, this was gathered before the recent waves of reclosing and infection spikes. So we're monitoring this to see how these move over time. Okay, here's a deep dive into a couple representative cities that sort of represent each of those groups. Denver, early returners. When we look through what Denver looks like from a demographic perspective, it skews male, it skews less diverse, lower range of incomes, they're slightly less educated, they've got more kids than average, and they tend to go to more sporting events than the other groups. Orlando, you've got middle returners. Again, a little more heavily male, could just be in our sample, more diverse, middle income range, slightly more educated, fewer kids than average, and they're going to sports, theater, and concerts equally. And then San Francisco, mainly late returners, skews female, more diverse, higher income. It's also the Bay Area, so those two go together. More educated, fewer kids, and they're more into arts and theater. And what our takeaway from this is that identifying which types of returners are primarily in your local market is going to be really helpful in helping you successfully position, organize, and market as events start coming back. So if you look at cities like Denver and see what goes well and what doesn't go as well as they might hope, it may give you some suggestions for how to open things up in your area. So when we talk about what people are worried about, we've got about half of our fans who have been financially impacted by COVID. And we were concerned that financial impact was going to drive return behavior. You know, so if you had taken a financial hit, you were going to be less likely to go back to live events. What we actually found was that, you know, a quarter of people are concerned with safety and finances, but only 4% are concerned solely with having the money to spend, and 64%, so almost 2/3, their biggest concern is, do I feel safe to be in a crowd? And so that helps us know that what venues do to make people feel safe in a crowd is going to be key in getting people back to live events. And, you know, part of these expectations are around capacity, around venue layout. And what we're seeing, as I mentioned, is a slight shift toward wanting outdoors and wanting slightly smaller crowds.
Jen, I actually on that,
Yeah.
if you want to go back
Sure.
on, so one of the questions that's coming in here, and then one of the ones we know comes up often that we get even at Ticketmaster recently, is we have had events already that are very, with very strict social distance guidelines in place. So the ones that have actually published the safety guidelines and are already, you know, having some small capacity events. Is it too early to tell? Any insight to share with the audience here today and the attendees, just a sentiment that we're seeing with those fans? And are they saying that what they say about that experience? And then also, are they going to go again?
We actually did some qualitative work talking to fans who were going to the Travis McCready show, which was one of the first, if not the first, shows. And we talked to them before and after the show. So we got to hear what they were thinking, what they were worried about, what their concerns were, what was driving them to go. Then we also got to hear how it actually went. And, you know, the fans were really excited to go back. Most of them were very, very invested in the artist. And so that was leading them to go back. You know, the tickets were fairly low cost. So buying a fan pod, I believe they had to buy 6 tickets. That was fine. And, you know, they were feeling very optimistic about it. After the event, they felt like it had gone well. You know, it was a little weird to have fewer people there, a little lower energy than a normal show, but compared to nothing for several months, it was enough energy for them. The other thing that we heard from them was that the mask thing was a little weird, because you could buy food and drinks, and how do you eat and drink with a mask on? And it wasn't 100, they didn't have it 100% down what the rules were for when you could lower your mask and have a drink or eat something versus when you couldn't. So that, I think, is an area where venues can make it really clear before fans get there, and then when they're at the venue, you know, if you have to have your mask on anytime you're in the concourse, anytime you're out of your seat, just make that really clear, and, you know, make it hard. My suggestion would be make it a little difficult to have your drink or your food until you have been able to sit down and take the lid or the case off or whatever, just because that will help people remember, oh, I can't take my mask off until I sit down. And so that was really what we were hearing. But, you know, obviously these were early returners because they went back, and they were all glad that they did. And they admitted they, you know, they'd invited friends to go who were a little uncertain. But in the end, everybody had a good time, which is our goal. And
yeah, and I think that's, oh, go ahead.
Nope, that was it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's the biggest takeaway. And I know we also saw too, we talked to not only the fan side, but also the, you know, the venue side as well. So both sides of these experiences so far that we're continuing to get information from, and it is still really early, but I think fan messaging continues to come up. And I know we have that some theme through here, but being able to make sure that fans are not only clear up front, like what to do in these settings, and then continuing to flag that, not only before you come, but while you're in the experience, so that they feel not only safe, but also understand the why about being safe, and kind of not sitting there unsure about how to handle it. So I think that's key.
Yeah, and actually you bring up a good point that we did talk to venue managers as well. And one of them had a very interesting take on getting people to follow the safety protocols. And he actually had his event staff, he runs a small comedy club, actually had the event staff, you know, commending people who were wearing their masks and doing what they were supposed to. So, you know, rather, you know, obviously they were still telling people who didn't have their masks on to put them back on, but they were also, when they saw people consistently doing things the way they wanted them to, they made sure to, you know, thank them for that.
Yeah, no, that's a good tip.
Yeah. All right. So moving on, I know a lot of people have been thinking about, you know, I just mentioned financial impact from COVID. People are thinking about price reductions, you know, how should we be charging for tickets? What should we be charging for tickets? And we've actually, this is one thing we are seeing changes in. Less than a third of fans expect that prices are going to drop over time. And we've seen this number decrease from almost 40% in the first wave of this study, down to under 30%. So the expectation that tickets are going to cost less is dropping. And as I mentioned, about half of them have been financially impacted by COVID, but that is not impacting their intention to return to live events. You know, before I mentioned that more than 3/4 of people are missing live events. And when we look at, you know, people's plans to return, whether they've been impacted financially by COVID is not impacting their intention to return to live events. Okay, I will orient you to this graph because this is actually data modeling that another member of our team did. And what it shows you on the bottom is the percent discount, and on the y-axis, the left side, it's the projected revenue. So if you look at this model, I'll start with the August line. if you didn't offer any discount in August, and remember, these are projective numbers. This is a model. This is not actual numbers gathered in a survey. This is mathematically created. If you offered no discount in August, you would expect to make about 20% of the available revenue for a given event. If you offered a discount of 20, 40%, you'd get a little more revenue. But if you offered a huge discount, you'd actually get even less revenue than if you offered no discount. And if you look at September and October, you can see that the more discount you offer in those later months, the less revenue you get. And so the takeaway from this is that any revenue gained by discounting tickets is going to drop off over time. So we suggest, focus on getting the word out to get people in the door. And if you are going to offer any discounts at all, target those early returners, because of the 3 returner groups, they're the ones who are most likely to respond positively. And most likely don't take that to mean that you should definitely discount for early returners, because they view it more positively. But overall, less than a quarter of fans indicated that a discount in ticket prices was going to drive them back to live events in any way, or make them consider going earlier than they currently plan to. Things like money back guarantees and health and safety precautions, those are making people more comfortable with going back. All right. So
Jen, we actually have a question. So if I can,
sure.
So one of the things, and I think this ties also to our messaging, that we've had so far, and the theme around fan messaging being important and safety. So this attendee asks, are there any concerns with putting regulations around mandatory masks in place, considering the negative reaction to masks in, retail and other locations that have since gone viral? Is there anything that you can share or shed some light on that, or do you have a position on that based on research and insight we've seen so far with fans?
Actually, that's one of the things that we're going to talk about next. If you look at this slide, the top precautions that attract and repel fans, we asked people what things make you more likely, less likely, or have no impact on your likelihood to attend events. 30% of fans say they're less likely to go to an event when they're required to wear masks. And 21% are less likely to go to an event when they can't bring in a blanket or chair. And remember, lots of people want to go to an outdoor event. So not letting them bring in something comfy to sit on, they're not reacting positively to that. And they're really not reacting positively to wearing masks. Now, we do see differences across the 3 segments with mask wearing. And the early returners are the group that wants masks the least. And as I mentioned, our middle and late returners are going to be looking to what happens early to decide when they're comfortable going back. So getting buy-in from those early returners, and some of the things that we've talked about internally are, how can you make masks seem more fun and less invasive? I mentioned, do you have to wear your mask when you're sitting down in your seat? Is it just when you're in the concourse and going in and out of the venue? Can we allow people to not wear their masks all the time when they're in a position of social distancing? Can we figure out ways to make wearing a mask as cool as wearing a mask can be? Is it that the mask comes with your ticket and it's super cool and limited edition? Is it that, you've got the artist or the team making that request about the masks? Those kinds of things to encourage people to comply with it as much as you can. That's my takeaway. Yes, there are people who don't want to wear masks, but in some ways, the mask wearing requirement, if that's coming from the state or local government and is mandated, then it takes the decision off of the venue to make. But if that decision isn't one that's mandated, then that's something venues are going to have to work through, is the short answer to that.
And I know we talked about, no, I think that's good. And I know we talked about too, the messaging being less about telling you what to do and more telling you why the safety is in place and why it's important for you. So, and having then that credibility of the artist or whoever at the venue in real time, showing some videos or showing some messaging as, thank you for, helping us make sure that we can continue to bring you entertainment and having that continue to be a theme so that it feels less about me telling you to do it, so that you're doing it so that we can continue to have entertainment like this.
Yes. And there's two things we hear from fans when we ask them open-ended questions. One is that there are a lot of fans concerned about the staff and employees of venues and, wanting them to be safe and protected. So, that's one thing to kind of lean into, is the idea that you are keeping the people who are, the people who are allowing this event to happen, you're helping them. That's one of the things. And the other piece that we are hearing from fans is that I don't really want to do this, but if I have to, then I'll just have to kind of work around it. It's not something they necessarily are super excited about, but it's right along with, when you have to take a clear bag, or you have to, or you have to go through 2 different metal detectors or whatever. None of those things are fun, but if it becomes part of what you have to do, then people will do that. It's like taking off your shoes at the airport. It's not cool, but everybody has to do it. The flip side of those least desired things are the things that people really want. They really want to see increased cleaning and sanitation of the venue. And they want to see hand sanitizer stations throughout the venue. And so the takeaway from this is really that fans want to see precautions that the venues are doing. They want to see things the venue is doing differently to keep them safe. They're less excited about the things that they as fans have to do differently. So, kind of keeping that in mind is important. And when we look, those were the high level ones that are the yays and the nays. Some of the other things you can see here, things like social distancing at entry, temperature checks, no GA shows, no cash, clear bags, those things, generally people view those as fine. They're more likely to attend. And in fact, in most cases, you can see the gray in the middle is the, no impact. We didn't show that for obvious reasons, but the no impact, you can see that's the bulk of most of these. And then when you look at the things that the staff and the venue have to do, here you can see that for most of these, they're viewed positively. The ones that pop to the top for, people not being crazy about are the items that affect food and beverage. Fans are not keen on only prepackaged food. They're not keen on only pre-mixed or prepackaged cocktails. And, a little bit lower than that, no roving vendors or hawkers selling food. So, people like their food and drink at the venue. And I know there are some people who go to specific places because of specific food or drink options. And, so we're seeing some pushback on changing that. And I mentioned before, you know, things like outdoor venues versus indoor. What we are seeing a little shift in is over time, we are seeing fewer people say they're comfortable at both outdoor and indoor venues, and more people saying they're comfortable only at outdoor venues. You know, so basically we've seen a shift of, you know, there's a chunk of people who are saying, I'm not comfortable with indoor anymore, I'm only going to outdoor. And for venue size, we're not seeing a huge shift in the small venues. We are seeing a fairly big shift in the large size venues. So those arenas, those stadiums, we're seeing less people saying they think it would be good to attend an event at that size venue. And then for capacity, we asked a question around, you know, what capacity would you want the venue to be at? And we framed it in terms of, you know, a couple examples of, if it was a 2,000 person venue, like a theater, and, you know, and 200 people was 10% of the capacity, where would you want the capacity to be? And we also asked it in terms of a larger event. And what we found was that people want things to be at about half capacity in a post-COVID world. So to kind of bring it home, people live in different places. They have very different expectations about what live events are going to look like when they come back fully. But the one thing that they all agree on, and that came through, is that they love live events and they want to go back to them. And so I think, you know, that's worth keeping in mind, is that most fans view this as it's a temporary interruption in what they hope will return to the next normal. And they're looking forward to getting back. And we are keeping the updates coming. Volume 3 will be out soon. I was actually meeting with our design team this morning to talk through that. So that will be coming soon. And I want to thank all of you for your time and attention. And if we have additional questions, we are happy to take those now.
Thanks, Jen. I super appreciate it. And we do have some questions that I know that have already come in. And also, I see some folks out there who've raised their hands for questions. And so, Perk, I don't know if we can allow them to speak up and just share those. I see Dave on the line, also our president of the EAMC board, who's raised his hand and has also, along with some attendees. So.
Right.
And then I think I can allow Dave to talk. There you go, Dave.
Hey there, how are you?
Hey.
Hey, I was just curious, one of the things that I've heard on different surveys is that people, you know, politically are coming down on different sides of, you know, where they want to, you know, whether they're willing to come back and return. I didn't know if that was an aspect you'd be looking at for future surveys, just because it kind of, we're definitely seeing some divisions there.
In our survey, we actually, for the current wave, we've got questions around political leaning. I can tell you from open-ended responses, which clearly communicate political leanings, we're not seeing people's willingness to return shift along political lines. We are certainly seeing their willingness to wear masks shifting along political lines, not surprisingly.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good question, Dave. Thanks for that. And I think it also brings up a point that we're continuing to do these ongoing and surfacing how often, because that's one of the questions, are we refreshing this data, Jen, and how often, like as far as our recommendations, you know, are we focused on a refresh?
We have been, the fan beat that is externally facing, they have been creating that about basically on a monthly cadence. We are gathering data in an ongoing way, and then we aggregate it up for those fan beats. So this one came out the very beginning of July, which wow, is now almost 2 weeks ago. Time flies. So the next one will be out we're looking for that to be out the beginning of August.
Perfect. And then I think we have another question here from someone who's raised their hand. And for those who have questions, feel free to just go into the Zoom and raise your hand. But I think it's Michael. I've just allowed you to talk if you had a question out there, Michael. And you can let me know if Dave asked your question or if you had a separate question.
Oh, Dave asked my question. Thank you.
Oh, perfect. Way to go, Dave. All right. And then I think I see someone else, Kurt, in Melissa, I believe. Is she muted?
We do have one from Ed Rubenstein. He said, is Live Nation routing artists appealing to younger artists earlier, perhaps first quarter 2021, as opposed to older demo artists touring later, perhaps in second or third quarter? Any knowledge of that?
I do not have any knowledge of that, but I can put them in touch with the people who would be able to answer that.
Yeah, I think that's something we can circle back with. It's a good question, and obviously this is insight we're sharing with everyone, and they're taking that into consideration. But we also have seen that it's continuing to shift. And then when you say, who those early returners are, I think we're all definitely paying attention to that. But we will tap to that and certainly circle back. And when I say circle back, I think that also is a note that I want to just let the group know. We have an EAMC chat board on our Facebook page, as well as this recording for those who have either folks on your staff and or you want to reference it back. We're recording this and it will be on the EAMC at Home YouTube channel. So for those of you who want to come back and reference this or see even some of our previous at-home sessions, check us out on our YouTube channel and on the at-home Facebook page, so on EAMC on our message board. If you're not following that, you're missing out. But I will say a lot of the sharing is happening ongoing. So a lot of our venues when we're talking about fan messaging examples, a lot of folks have been on there and sharing examples of fan messaging, and I would encourage you to continue to do that because I think there's been some really great learnings. Even early on, a lot of sharing happening around ways to engage folks during COVID and what are your safety plans, and now fan messaging. So please, if you're not already, feel free to share those and circle back. Any other questions? I see a couple here, Kurt, that are in the,
Yeah, we've got one more. As concerts begin again, how can we as venues make artists and their management feel comfortable as well? How are backstage precautions different than perhaps front of house?
I suspect that some of those backstage precautions are going to need to mirror the front of the house precautions for artists and their entourages to feel safe. Thinking about DL Hewley, where he was doing an event and no masks, and he wound up contracting COVID. So, that's probably going to be on artists' minds, is how do we make sure that everybody backstage and everybody in front of house are equally safe?
Yeah. Any other questions out there? No? Okay. I think if you do have any, feel free to pop it in as we're closing, but I will say thank you, Jen, for joining us and sharing a sneak into all of what we're seeing right now for fans and what they're saying, but also letting us know that, having some insight into how we can be thinking about this data, I think is helpful also for the group and some of the continued themes that we're seeing throughout. I think for this group to know, again, you can reference this session back at our EAMC YouTube channel. And then just so you guys know, if you have questions for Jen, she has offered to feel free to reach out to her directly. again, she's our senior researcher and continuing to refresh this. And Jen, do you want to share your info as far as your email address? It should be easy to remember, but.
Sure, it's jennifer.plebani, Plebani, at Ticketmaster.com.
So similar to mine, so jessica.runyon at Ticketmaster. If you forget, you can always go to her name and just remember there's a dot in between at Ticketmaster and reach out for questions. You can also reach out to me. And then thank you so much, Jenna. I truly appreciate it.
Well, thank you, and thanks to Kirk, and thanks to everybody for joining us. This was a lot of fun, and I look forward to keeping you guys updated as things emerge.
That's awesome. Thanks, Jen. And thank you again. Big thanks to all the attendees for joining. I think we've seen week after week a lot of attendance here, and then also folks visiting who couldn't make it back to our YouTube channel to see previous sessions. Please look for the survey on Friday. Give us your feedback. We truly appreciate it and value it and use it to make decisions. And if you haven't, follow the EAMC Facebook page just so that we can continue with the dialogue and be sharing, not just letting it stop today, but continuing with this and sharing across the group. So again, many thanks to everyone, and have a great rest of your Thursday and soon to be weekend. Thanks, Kurt.